19th century images to show why the idea of a hero who saves us white Christians from the savages was so popular. It was the most popular myth in the first third of the 19th century, when our nation was young. When we wanted homegrown heroes, we didn't want to hear about Robin Hood or William Tell. We wanted American heroes. Well, here's some pictures. This took place near Worcester, in which the savages always lurked. I don't know why they gave good lurk, but in all the stories they were lurking. They're waiting until the farmer goes out in the field. They get him, put an axe in his head, then they go in and kill the women and children. The next picture, and these are all from 19th century magazines, the next picture builds up the idea that it's complete fantasy of, here's the state flag of Connecticut, and it says, "He has borne us over the sea," and everything is flowering, everything is growing. And it's true here, people could own their own land. And as you know, in the old world, many of you are familiar with your ancestors, they didn't own anything. Going to church, the stalwart family is menaced by the lurking savage there. In other words, civilization that came from across the great waters, God's chosen people made it here, but they're menaced on the left, the sinister side. Sinister in Latin means left. And on the sinister side, the natives are there about to destroy all this fertility and piety. Yet another picture is just north of here. These are the soldiers who are coming down from Turner's Falls and are ambushed by the natives who were lurking along the trail. They were coming down from the mill on the North Hadley Pond that was burned in 1676, 77. Okay. Next one. This is what happened if the Indians got a hold of you. It isn't a pretty picture. They're burning some people, and this is ironic. The English should be talking about burning people. Queen Mary, that is the Catholic queen, burned 300 Protestants and bragged about it, etc., and the favor was returned. Anyway, here are chopping up babies, chopping up a young man, and the little child is menaced. Behind all of this is the idea of the slaughter of the innocents in the New Testament. That is, these are savages trying to destroy the holy family of the white man. Once again, who knows what their fate is? But you can see already the skin is getting darker. And this is the early 19th century. And remember, our first act as a nation was try to destroy the new republic in Haiti because slaves had revolted and threw away the colonialists. And our Southerners did not want that. A few years later, we fought against Mexico. Remember the Alamo, not because we wanted that nothing land between here and Mexico, but the Mexican Constitution forbids slavery. So you find that Native Americans and blacks start to look alike. We need a champion to save us against these dreadful outrages. Here, on the far left, the sinister side, remember, with the palm tree, a weird palm tree growing, is the primitive life. You burn your enemies. And here is a woman with her child at the mercy of that red-skinned savage. And here's their little shacks, their villas. Okay. This isn't going too fast, you get the idea. Just a few miles to the east of here, this is one American literary genre that's invented called the Captivity narrative. Mary Rowlandson was taken from her house and lived, I forget how many months, about 8 months, with the Native Americans, and then went back and wrote a book about it. The fact is that of white women kidnapped by Indians, at least 1/3 to 40% stayed with the Indians. They didn't want to go back to the Anglos. Yeah, well, you think it's funny. But anyway, it was a real affront. So Mary Rowlandson had to show that she wasn't corrupted by her time with the Indians. She knew Indian words. She did work for them. They gave her a knife. So it was an easy relationship. But if you ever want to read an interesting self-identification book, it's a short one, read Mary Rowlandson. Went into any number of editions. Now, one of the most famous of the stories of people who saved themselves is Hannah Dunston. She's the first American woman to have a statue dedicated to her. She was kidnapped with another woman and a young English boy, a 13-year-old boy. What happens? They take her on the long marches in the woods, but when the Indians are sleeping, guess what she does? She gets her hatchet and makes, guacamole out of them. Next picture. This Hannah Dunston became extremely famous. This is an oil painting. I think this is at Utica. And you read a picture from left to right, Here, she's about to do away with those sleeping savages. This guy wants to prevent her. Can you imagine that? But she's going to have the last word. We're supposed to cheer for this. Okay. Next. This is yet another picture in a children's book from the 19th century. And luckily, the Indians are all laid up. It's just like chopping wood, one after another. Okay, please. Now, this is more familiar to us. This takes place a few years afterwards, the 1704 Deerfield raid. No matter what magnificent palace civilization had given us the skill to build, you were still menaced by these creatures who lurked and attacked when you at least expected it. Okay, next one. Now, what is the solution to the Indian problem? In 1634, this was the biblical and American solution. This is the Pequod Massacre. It was one of the glorious triumphs of the early 17th century and gave the pattern, the desired pattern, for people living afterward. The village was surrounded. The fact there were only women, children, and some old men there didn't matter. The two Anglo commanders came, shot them down, and then set them on fire. And as one said, the smell of their roasting flesh gave our God such happiness. Well, that's war. The thing is, this artist has showed something bad. Here are the white guys with their rifles, but look who's surrounding them, the natives. This massacre in 1634 in the Pequod, down by New London, Connecticut, did bring some peace until King Philip's War in 1675. This map came out in 1676, and as you see, Hadley. And to exterminate Indians, our forebears dressed up. They're very nattily dressed. And it's a very strange picture because nobody knows what inspired it. It would be wonderful if this were the Angel of Hadley business, but as we'll see, it probably isn't. Anyway, you get the idea that hostility between whites and Indians replicated the hostility between Protestant sects with each other and Protestants against Catholics and English against foreigners, Frenchmen and Italians and people like that. So everywhere the descendants of the Puritans looked, there were enemies that had to be gotten rid of. Next, please. Okay, here's the story. This is one version of it. Notice that civilized people are in the meeting house. This looks like it's about 40 feet high, doesn't it? Outside are the Indians. You see this one? But it's all going to turn out well because this old savior has a sword in his hand and he's pointing. This is Oliver Cromwell without the book, but with a sword who can lead his people to triumph. If you look on the back of your sheet, you'll see that the claim that this happened, let's say during King Philip's War, 1675, 1676, let's forget the exact date, is a bit suspicious. The first time it's ever mentioned is nearly 100 years later in a footnote that wasn't published till the 1820s, that there was a disturbance at Hadley that ended well. Nothing more. The president of Yale, 2 books came out elaborating this story, that what it was is a rescue by William Gough, the regicide, of us Hadley folk. Well, unfortunately, I give the reasons there, and we'll go into them later, but unfortunately, this to me sounds awfully hard to swallow. For example, other nations have exactly the same story. That is, when other nationalities are in trouble, a leader who's often in a cave comes out and helps them. This was Friedrich Barbarossa, the great German leader who had drowned in the Salif River in Turkey, in Asia Minor. He was in his 60s and rode his horse in ice-cold water and drowned in 1217. He didn't die. He's in the Kiefersberg Mountain, and this is a little chapel outside the Kiefersberg Mountain. When Germany needs him, he's going to come. And as you know, during the war, the Nazis were fond of the name Barbarossa for their expeditions. The next one. In other countries, this is my favorite. This is Holger the Dane, or Ogier Dansker. He sat so long waiting that the statue near Copenhagen has his beard fusing with the chair he's sitting on. I don't know how he's going to get up quickly unless he uses the sword to trim it. But anyway, Ogier the Dane. The Danes have this. The Portuguese have this. The Brazilians have this. The Spanish have this. People, next slide please. And to our purposes, this is King Arthur. Remember King Arthur, he has to throw his sword back into the pond. And then women from the fairy world, the other world, come and sail him off to a place called Avalon, Apple Island. But he isn't just killing time there, dancing and so on. He's waiting till he has to get up again and help England. That's why I wonder about the story of the Angel of Hadley. Doesn't it remind you of all these stories? Next, please. And yet the story is a wonderful story. Book after book after book. History books, children's books, textbooks, and as we'll see, just standalone art, repeat the same story. Here's one version. This isn't a famous history book by, well, three famous historians. This one is in a Cosmopolitan magazine with a poem by Bliss Carman, a very famous poet around the turn of the century, around the 1890s. This is an illustration for that. And all of these back up, we can stop there for a second, all of these back up the material that had already been used for almost a century by authors like Nathaniel Hawthorne, Sir Walter Scott, Robert Southey, the Poet Laureate of England, James Fenimore Cooper, the great fine arts writers, plus the history writers, plus the textbook writers, plus the standalone artists. So it was a tidal wave of taking maybe some historical facts and using them as a springboard, as a trampoline to get you into these pyrotechnics. If you click next, this is from James Fenimore Cooper's The Wish, Wept Tone Wish. Here the hero is in an underground cavern and he's barring the Redskins from coming in. He's soon going to go out and scare the dickens out of them. And this was read by hundreds of people, thousands. Next. Well, the story gets even more Hadley-eyed. Guess what that's from? Yeah, remember the 1909, our 250th celebration. We had, what was it, you had 80-some events here. During our 350th, Hadley 1909 had an equal amount. This is, it says, what does it say? Goth the Regicide, yeah. And here it is, September 1st, 1675. Guess who designed this float? What blind author who'd never seen a float designed 20 of the 40 floats? This is Clarence Hawkes. And so you couldn't get away from it. And who wanted to? Remember, I began by being a grouch, saying I'm going to take something away from you. I can't do it. Everybody believes this story. They want to believe this story. It makes you feel good about where you came from. And even if you're not prejudiced against Indians or Catholics or other Protestant sects, it makes you feel good that heroes like this operate and do so in our town. We don't have to cross the bridge to see them or something like that. Okay, if you will, the next slide. How do we remember Goth? He's everywhere. This is that rusty old sign where I nearly got taken out on the bridge. Walked over on the bike trail, got up, and the traffic was zinging along, and I had to step out into the roadway. But they didn't get me. Anyway, as you see, it says the regicide, Generals Goff and Whaley were concealed for 15 years in the pastor's house. You've noticed this sign, right? As you come over, it's on the north side of the bridge as you come in. Okay, the next one, Caroline. This is the stone where Carver's used to be at the corner of West Street and Route 9. You know, regicide means a king killer, right? And there are still, I just got an email from a retired colleague of mine who's living in Oxford. He hates royalty. He doesn't like the king and queen because in England now, I mean the queen because she spends so much money, but he read my book and he was so happy. He says, give it to him. He says, behead them all. I wouldn't go that far, but we remember them. Next one, please. This is right across the street from what used to be Sophia's place. The next street, as you know, is Whaley, and that makes me smile because at the end of Whaley Street in Route 9, what's there? A Catholic church. Okay, next slide, please. This sign sums it all up. Here's Gough Street. Here are the three pillars of Puritan communities. One is civil government. You choose what laws you want to pass for your own good. Secondly is the church. It would be nice to think that that unified people, but remember within 1 year of coming here, the refugees from Wethersfield, Connecticut, the churches split off. There were soon two churches. They couldn't get along with each other. But anyway, this is at least a symbol. And finally, the school. Education for everybody. So the great Puritan idea of education, piety, and civil government come together here. The one little thing is Sophia's Polish restaurant, which is gone, as you know. Too bad. Chris was a wonderful poet. But anyway, this is sort of the symptom of how Gough, it seems to me, incorporates the best values that we want to believe about ourselves. And I don't know if the truth or falsehood about it, the actual incident matters. Is there one more slide? Yeah. This for all you fact grubbers, and I must end now. As you go home, please think about the evidence that you've seen. I hope the images stick in your mind. And we know that the assertion is made that Gough saved Hadley from an Indian attack. The first evidence comes in a private manuscript that isn't published till 1828, okay? 1675, 1775, 1828. That's a long time. Now, I've given 5 reasons why I personally can't accept the rescue story. First of all, it's not reported anywhere. And Puritans, as we've already established, felt they're all alone with God. Everything that happens is sent by God. Floods, fires, rain, overheated rooms, all of these are due to God. And so they were notorious record keepers, diary keepers. They sent in reports, especially of Indian attacks, especially during King Philip's War. You almost know to the hour how long the encounters lasted, how many people were killed and so on. No mention of it. Secondly, Hadley, it would be nice to think, was a united community. A wonderful essay by Doug Wilson, his widow came to see me in Amherst. He wrote a wonderful essay saying all these people were related by Puritan ideals and thus they kept a secret. That's nice to think so. But Hadley, as some of you know, they were bickering all the time. The best example is Molly Webster, the accused of witchcraft. But a lot of people disliked Parson Russell, they disliked Peter Tilton, the other person who hid them. There were outsiders in and out who had no reason to keep the secret. Thirdly, historically, after Charles II, there was a Catholic-leaning King James II. He left. He threw the Great Seal of London in the Thames and left angrily. And then the succeeding rulers were roughly Protestant. They didn't care. And especially during the 18th century, they had 3 kings. George I couldn't speak English. George II was a little better, and George III was okay, but remember, he had porphyria, mental disease. They had no interest in punishing anybody for something that had happened in 1649. And so the idea that one had to keep the secret, I think, is exaggerated. Finally, I think we've gone into this well enough. If we accept the Angel of Hadley story, then we can take our place with other nations who had a strong ruler who was going to protect us. And finally, the best part of it, one pious white guy can lick all them redskins. And don't forget, the 19th century, that was the terror. Well, what can I say? You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you very much.